When I first saw the work of Jeffrey Gibson, I was struck by his distinct and bold visual language and the way he weaves together references, techniques, and materials from American Indigenous, queer, and popular cultures.
In the beginning of your career, you're alone so much, and you are the person you're having a conversation with.
Following the unveiling of his major bronze sculptures depicting 4 woodland animals on the facade of the Met Museum in New York for the Genesis Facade Commission, I'm visiting him at his studio in Hudson, upstate New York, to see his latest works, beaded punching bags, ceramic heads, and large-scale paintings, and to learn more about where it all began.
So, you were born in Colorado, but you've moved and lived and grown up and worked. How many countries, how many places?
I was born in Colorado Springs, and then we moved to North Carolina, to Germany, to New Jersey, to Korea, to Maryland. Then I went to school in DC, Chicago, grad school in London, and then moved to New York in basically 2000.
How have all of those places, all of that growing up in different places, how has that influenced how you see the world around you?
Moving in all those places was not easy because of, I've always been an indiscriminate race, right? So no one ever knew where to place me. So when you're abroad, you're American. And when you come back to the US, you're immediately into this social structure of America, which is very much about race and class and heritage and background. So I think what I learned how to do, to my benefit and to my detriment, was to kind of how to perform.
So it's a survival thing.
Yeah, I think for sure.
What values or traditions even do you think you've taken with you through your life, from your culture, from your cultural background?
I think I have an incredible work ethic. I remember quite early on my father telling me, life is not fair, and you might have to work 2-3 times harder than the person next to you. Both Choctaw and Cherokee people, the original inhabitants of where Native people were pushed to in the center of the United States, in the center of this continent, and then displaced back out. You know, both of my grandfathers were Southern Baptist ministers. They would preach and sing in Choctaw and Cherokee. And so I think the lesson is really that I come from a family that survived, endured, and managed to maintain a degree of happiness and faith.
Can you share a formative moment that shaped how you see the world as an artist?
I was born in 72, right? So I become aware of the idea of becoming an artist in the mid-'80s. I'm living in Korea, and there was 1 hour of MTV from midnight to 1 a.m. They were having Warhol and Keith Haring create the commercials. And so this was my curated view of what was happening abroad. I think that was really formative because it was so focused on a New York City creative artistic scene that seemed to be very welcoming to everyone. It took me a long time to be able to say out loud, I want to be an artist.
Let's take a moment.
Yeah.
I invite you to think about number of artworks, 2, 3, whichever, that have played a significant role for you, that have had an influence on you. And that can be music, it can be anything.
I'm almost a little bit embarrassed to say this.
That's probably a good thing then.
But I feel really lucky that I was able to go to Madonna's Blonde Ambition tour in 1990.
So you're a
right?
Madonna fan?
Yeah, I would say I am, yeah, for sure. But that particular
Yes.
era, is a very specific Madonna.
And so,
Yeah.
so tell me why that was significant.
It's interesting to look at it now, but she was really provocative for her time in terms of the demand for acknowledgement of women, of gay people, being so forthrightly provocative about religion, morality, and censorship. It was the AIDS crisis and her acknowledgement of that. It was such a counter persona to what was happening in the world at that moment.
And actually what you're describing with Madonna, in a way, as someone who drew together, as you say, religion, morality, sexuality, all of these things, and then turned that into a performance, turned that into a persona, turned that into a form of power.
Absolutely. And I think it's, when you grow up in that era, this era is a shock. Because it felt so history shifting. It felt so like, oh, we're pivoting. And it felt like it laid the foundation for a future.
Anything else?
My father would always bring me back posters from his travels. And he brought me back a couple of Henry Matisse cutout posters, and they were sort of this big. When I was about 17, the National Gallery in DC did an exhibition of Matisse cutouts. And I remember being so excited to go and see them. I walked upstairs, I turned the corner, and I had no idea it was like 125 feet wide. I had looked at this poster this big the entire time, and each piece was like huge, and I remember feeling my blood pressure shoot up. I remember feeling like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to process this. And I had to leave the gallery and go sit down, catch my breath, and come back in. And I had to make myself, like consciously in my head, make myself walk back and forth in front of it and try to understand how you would make something like this. And then seeing those photos of him in a wheelchair with a cane pushing the paper around, I would say that was a real moment.
And then something that's non-visual art as well. Any other thing?
Learning about Leigh Bowery.
Oh, interesting.
And Leigh Bowery passed, I think, 2 years before I came to London.
So what year was that?
I came in 96.
Yeah.
A roommate of mine, in fact, said to me that I should, have you ever heard about Leigh Bowery? And I said, no. And I lived in Herne Hill, just behind Brixton. And, we talked about the fridge. And when I learned about Leigh, I just was blown away immediately. I think just his body being similar to my body in terms of his height and his like dimension, and seeing somebody so like flamboyantly and unapologetically putting themselves on display. I always found that his voice was one of real generosity. And then to see Minty and like, Useless Man is one of my favorite events, but him hanging upside down and crashing through glass. And then of course him passing from AIDS. It's all tied into that kind of individualism, but like really, really strong characters.
Do you think, take those two, Madonna, Leigh Bowery, did seeing them help you see yourself?
Seeing them, I think, really sets up, for me at least, it's like, could you do that? It's like someone throwing the gauntlet down and being like, well, someone else did it, can you do it? And when I was coming in as a young artist, you don't know how far you're gonna have to go. So when you see individuals who like, against many odds, not only cracked it open, but like tore the house down, you're like, okay, like it's possible. You just have to figure out your way in.
You've talked in interviews before that your early years as an artist were characterized by a relentless loop of disappointment.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
What was that and how did you get through that?
I think probably I experienced the loop of disappointment that many artists do, but mine felt like misunderstood. This is going back to like early 2000s, but when I was painting, I was thinking about weaving, or I was thinking about basketry, or I was thinking about bullet holes in dresses that were taken off of battlefields. So when I drew a circle or when I painted a dot, and there's a spillage coming out of it, to me it was visceral. To other people it was like it was a formalist language of contrast, you know.
Yes.
And I was like, no, absolutely not. So on one hand, the disappointment was about, where's my audience? When is my audience going to show up? I think eventually, and I realized this is not working, so I'm going to scrap this and let me rethink like how to come back harder the next time.
I mean, look, you work extraordinary facility for color, for pattern, textile, but you also talk about beauty and the use of beauty as a strategy.
Yeah.
You talk about what that strategy is.
Well, it's wild because I used to say that, beauty, which also was heavily criticized during my formative years. There was always a hidden agenda of beauty, and a distrust of it. And I think what I found is like the beauty is really this thing to draw someone in, to hold them just a little bit longer. But I don't think about vapid beauty. I think about like this intentional craft of something that is beautiful. When I was working on Venice recently, what I realized was, we can look at these objects made by Indigenous people over the past 200 years, and these times of incredible trauma and duress. Why would they spend days, weeks making these gorgeous, beautiful objects? I think what's happening is it's kind of like a manifestation of a hope for a future. This focus that is required to make this object come into existence is remarkable. Beauty to me now is not just visual, it's also it's the aura. Why did we ever want to get rid of the aura of an artwork?
Come to the Met Facade. The animal that therefore I am.
That's a great title.
It's a great title.
It's not my words, but I think it's a great title. I wish I had thought of it on my own.
But it's entitled by Derrida.
Yeah.
By Jacques Derrida. And Derrida there is talking about the relationships between species, between human and non-human species, and more than human species. What takes you to Derrida as a point of inspiration?
I read the lectures in the late 90s. Well, I probably read them actually early 2000s. By that point, I had worked with Helene Sissou. I had taught a class on Deleuze. So this kind of deconstructivist thinking was something that I've always returned to. Originally, with the Met sculptures, I did not think about animals so much as I thought about animism within global cultures, within faith practices, like early faith practices globally. And this idea where, from what I can see, the majority of cultures had some sort of relationship to the natural environment. I think what I liked about the lectures by Derrida is that the subject is actually about the loss of empathy and the loss of the view of ourselves as part of the animal world. I've also I've used this deck of medicine cards that use animal spirits to. It's kind of like a tarot. It is a tarot deck, and I realized I was like, oh yeah, I've used this since my 20s. Like, this is not an entirely new thing. It's just that Derrida's lectures kind of cohere it, I think, in a timely way.
So, I mean, these four animals, the deer, the coyote, the hawk, and the squirrel. And these are animals that, that are native to here, in Hudson, but also you can find them in Central Park.
All of them except for the deer in Central Park. Yeah.
Why those animals in particular?
You know, it really just had to do with like, what are the animals that I see? We have an abundance of hawks up here. Of course, squirrels, I think, are the ubiquitous kind of New York City, but also everywhere animal. And the squirrel, interestingly enough, is the species that has thrived because of our excess and has thrived because of our waste. And then the deer was a personal experience of running into a deer when we first moved up to the Hudson Valley, which was an all-white deer, and I saw it twice. And
what did you take from that?
well, I went home and I looked it up and I thought, okay, what is this about? Because it was strange that it didn't run away. It stood there, and it was about 50 feet away, and it was just glowing. It was a glowing white deer in the middle of the forest, and it was at a time in my life when, just before this chapter, you know. By that I mean like a returned commitment to art making, the decision to have a family, moving up here, which had to do with trying to create a more sustainable existence for myself. And it was about kind of a reset towards a kind of calmer, more abundant future. And then the coyote, I think, really is probably the one which has the most to do with having grown up as a Native person and being familiar with trickster stories, coyote trickster stories. And I've heard so many versions of trickster stories, some of which are pretty gruesome and scary, and other ones which are sort of cunning and witty and humorous. And I've really been thinking about transformation for a very long time now. I've talked about, you know, even within the paintings, the way that the transparent color transforms color in this kind of multiplicitous way. And to be quite honest, it's since I started working on the 4 sculptures, I've thought, was there any other animal that I would do? And I really, there's a couple, but they would still be things that I would want in my kind of immediate surroundings.
Was there any point in the process of making these works that surprised you? That
The sculptures?
Yeah.
I do work so much in the atmospheric things that surround us. You know, so to choose an image and a form that is representational was probably the biggest surprise. I knew that I wanted to do something that referred to a kind of cultural imagery about transformation. I think when I landed on this sense of animism, I started thinking about different times when I've seen humans wear garments to perform as other animals, right? There's also many indigenous dances which are based off of the movements of animals. And so I think that was really the big surprise when I kept coming back to it. It was like, it's animals. Like I'm gonna make these sculptures of animals. But it was important, you know, the base of them are not the feet of the animals.
Well, this is, yes, exactly, yes.
Yeah, so they transform from the wood to the armature to the base of hide wrapped around materials to their adorned cells. I mean, something like the Met Facade is such a public space. You know, oftentimes I tell people, it's like, you know, you don't accidentally end up in a museum. You know, it's like a destination choice. But the front of the building, somebody who's just hanging out on Fifth Avenue or riding their bike down Fifth Avenue, it's going to be visible. I am interested in a viewer being affected or being engaged or intrigued to look longer. That is what completes the work for me. Like, there is a really earnest attempt to create an understanding. I think with the animals, it was really about, these are animals which I would say we overlook. You know, I've said it also in the past, terms like Indigenous, Native American, they don't acknowledge the hundreds of distinct tribal communities in North America, but, and the same as animals. You know, it's this flattening term for the thousands of species. and species that we have to presume we haven't even discovered yet.
Is there anything you'd say to your younger self, beginning to become an artist? I'm wondering what...
The piece of advice that I was told that I continue to give other people is make your goal big enough for the sacrifices you're going to have to make. Because it's easier to fight for something big than it is to be miserable over something small, you know? And I think that's probably the advice, that if someone can hear that and can really receive it, is really valuable.
Oh, thank you very much,
Yeah.
Jeffrey.